For me, it's tragic that United States, which started as a farming country, both if you think of the history of the Native Americans, they were farmers, or you think of the settlers. America was a land of small farmers. And that's what made it a free land.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from prolific author and tireless global activist Vandana Shiva. For decades, Vandana has led the charge against the misleading claims that industrial agriculture is feeding the world. She's challenged powerful corporations to prove their worth by delivering nutrition per acre instead of pounds per acre and asking that they start accounting for the true costs of their destructive practices. We're always glad to include Vandana's voice and knowledge in our annual symposium, and this year is no exception. So our virtual symposium is coming up. It's called Break 'em Up after Zephyr Teachout's book, and it will be on Sunday, March 17th from 3 to 5 Eastern. In the meantime, enjoy this conversation with Vandana and Dave as a glimpse into the subjects that we'll be covering.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm very pleased today to be speaking with Vandana Shiva. She is one of our movement's heroes. Vandana is the author and advocate of biodiversity, conservation, and farmers' rights. Perhaps she's the most influential international voice for local organic agriculture. She's truly a champion of the soil. She's a relentless opponent of centralized, commodified industrial agriculture. She founded Navdanya, which promotes agroecology. She's authored more than 20 books. She received the Right Livelihood Award, along with many others. And so, welcome, Vandana.
Hello, Dave.
I want to start with a little bit of history. I want to go back and have you talk about the Green Revolution. I think that this was such a important development in this long struggle. So could you talk about Green Revolution from your perspective?
So, my background is physics and my PhD is in the foundations of quantum theory and hidden variables and non-locality. And agriculture was very far from my disciplinary training. Of course, my mother, when she'd become a refugee, when Pakistan and India were split, she used to have a government job on the other side. And when she came to India as a refugee, she said, I've broken all the glass ceilings. Now I don't want to do government work. I just want to be a farmer. And so, of course, as children, we'd grown up on her farm, and this was a pre-Green Revolution farm. 84 is the year the Green Revolution kind of came into my life. I'd done my MSc honors in particle physics at the University of Punjab in Chandigarh. And, for 4 years I was at that university. And it was a peaceful place, a prosperous place, the richest part of India. And then in 84, it had exploded into violence. 15,000 people had been killed. And the narrative that was being given is it's a religious violence. It wasn't. It wasn't at all. Because, for example, the people being killed were the ones who controlled the Bhakra Dam, which controlled the rivers. The head of the seed corporation, which controlled the seed supply, which was the Green Revolution seed supply. So I decided to look at what was causing the conflicts. I was in those days working on a program for the United Nations University on conflicts over natural resources. And we'd built huge movements around forest questions, around fisheries questions, around river questions. And then this violence emerged. So I went to the roots. So often I had to cancel my trips because The train I was traveling in, couldn't reach because the track had been bombed. The bus I was taking had to come back because the bus ahead of us had been bombed. So that was the atmosphere in which I did that study. And the violence of the Green Revolution in America is available from the Kentucky University Press. I, in a way, looked at the Green Revolution from the lens of a quantum analysis. In quantum theory, there's nothing like a single cause, single effect. There's context. A context creates a particle, a context creates a wave. And I said there's a context that's creating the violence. So what is the context? And that's how I had to go back to the Green Revolution. Now, 1966 is the year the Green Revolution was introduced to India. It's not that they hadn't been trying to introduce the chemicals ever since the end of the wars. The Rockefeller and Ford had been pushing the chemicals. The problem was native seeds don't like chemicals. I call it the civil disobedience of native seeds, because native seeds are bred for multi-purpose. Straw goes to the soil, it grows to the animals, the grain goes to humans. So you maximize everything. You maximize the straw and you maximize the grain. And when you take the total biomass into account, all traditional varieties produce more. And then if you take the nutrition into account, they produce much, much, much more. So I realized that the chemical issue had been pushed for a long time, but the seeds and the chemicals didn't go together. So Norman Borlaug was put on the job of changing the seed and the plant for the chemicals, for the fertilizer, because the lodging problem was a big break for them. They couldn't sell. And Borlaug basically took tall plants and replaced them with dwarfs. So they're called dwarf varieties. And, I always think of that silly little film, Mummy, I Shrunk the Kids, or something like that. Yeah. So Norman Borlaug was basically saying, well, I shrunk the plants. And on top of it, I said, I am producing more. Now, how can you shrink a plant and claim to produce more? So I went into deep depth, both into historical records at that time. And since then, we've done a lot of research on all this. On our farm at Navdanya, we measure every season. We measure all the native varieties. We saved 750 varieties on our farm of rice, 250 varieties of wheat, every pulse, every oil seed that you can imagine. So Borlaug, who had worked for the DuPont Defense Lab, was put to this job of changing plants, changing agriculture. And 65, we'd had a drought. The drought meant that there was an increase in price. There was no starvation. There was no famine. 42 was the last big famine during British rule. But the story that's always told is, a Green Revolution got India out of the ship-to-mouth existence. We got India out of famines. They show 42 famine images and make it look like the Green Revolution solved that. No, we solved it through independence. We became free as a nation. So 65 drought was used to push the Green Revolution. And our prime minister of that time, who wanted to import a little more wheat just to stabilize prices, not because anyone was starving. The farmers had gone back to their villages and they weren't working at these big, townships of steel plants and all of these giant new modern India. So people wouldn't work. And so they had to lower the costs of wheat. And Shastri wanted to import a little more wheat. And Johnson, who was the president at that time, said, sorry, you got to change your agriculture. You got to adopt the chemicals. You got to adopt the new seeds. And very mysteriously, Shastri died while visiting Tashkent for a peace talk with Pakistan. And then the push carried on and they pushed the Green Revolution. So it's not that India chose it. India was forced to adopt it. It was totally a Rockefeller Ford chemical industry push with Norman Borlaug playing the role of basically creating dwarf farms. It's stolen wheat from Japan during the war and stolen rice he didn't do the rice, that was done by Erie. And in my book, I went into depth, what happened to the water, because it uses 10 times more water. So there's a water famine. What happened to the soil? Chemical fertilizers kill the soil, as we know. That's why real organic is so important. Biodiversity, of course. Punjab used to grow 250 species of plants. Now it is growing rice in one season, which is not a crop of Punjab, and wheat in another season. And rice, of course, needed a lot of water, but 10 times more because of the way chemicals create thirsty soils. Toxics. There's a train that leaves Punjab that's called the cancer train. We have a book called Toxics in Our Food, which has synthesized all the research. And the key districts of Punjab, where the cancer rates are very high, are the key Green Revolution districts. So, you touch anything, the beginnings of the problem are the Green Revolution, including the farmers' protests. And because I was collecting every document that the farmers were putting out, in fact, on 4th of June, when Indira Gandhi had to send the military to the Golden Temple, the reality was that day the farmers had called a blockade. They said, we are living under slavery. If we can't choose the seeds we grow, if we can't choose how we'll grow it, if we can't decide when the waters of our own rivers will come to our fields, if we can't decide where we will sell what we grow, and we can't decide what price we will sell it at, we are living under slavery. So 4th of June, 1984, they had called for a blockade and said, we will not supply Delhi. That's when the military was sent to the Golden Temple. And that year, because this was the sacred shrine, Indira Gandhi was assassinated. And that's what pushed me. And that same year, Indira Gandhi was assassinated just 3 days before Bhopal. So the Bhopal disaster was the second wake-up call for me. I said, why are we using chemical that killed thousands of people? How did this pesticide plant, owned by Union Carbide, now owned by Dow DuPont, which is now Corteva? Why? I'd grown up controlling pests with the neem. I'd grown up controlling pests with the hundreds of trees that we have. And we have a book called Biodiversity, Agroecology, and Regenerative Organic Farming, which documents all of this work of regenerative organic farming, because we just decided if they were going to attack organic, we were going to continue using organic and just prefix it with regenerative, because it's based on regenerative processes, regenerating the soil, regenerating the biodiversity, regenerating the water. So that's the story of the Green Revolution. India was the first lab. And today's farmers' protests actually continue from that time.
It seems that the Green Revolution, that the real Green Revolution was a revolution of green money. It was about who owns what, who controls what.
Exactly.
The system is designed to make a very small number of people pretty wealthy. I mean, I think one of the outcomes of Green Revolution, when it hits a place, is that the land becomes much more consolidated, the ownership of the land, as they move from monoculture.
In the first 5 years, 25% of the small peasants had disappeared in Punjab because they couldn't afford the chemicals. Yeah? And then the lands continued to get consolidated. And basically the small farmer, who's the real provider of food, as my book, Who Really Feeds the World, has documented, it's the small farmers who feed the world. The large farms produce commodities, as you said. And commodities don't feed people. They make biofuel, they make animal feed. And that's the reason the Amazon is being invaded with GM soya. Not because people need it for eating. And I think how the way you describe the issue of commodification, chemical inputs and commodification, they go hand in hand.
Yeah. It's amazing. I think most people, of course, you live in a world where everybody understands what the Green Revolution is, but I don't think most people I know in America know what that is. They've heard about it. They got the Nobel Prize. It saved a lot of people from starvation. That's the story that's told.
Dave, even in India, the children are taught that the Green Revolution saved India. So when I go to schools and I talk about our work in Navdanya, and a kid will always put up their hand, but our book says it saved us from, Green Revolution saved us from starvation. And then I have to go through the calculus. That yield per acre doesn't tell you anything. Nutrition per acre is what you should measure. Real cost, the wealth per acre is what you should measure. And organic is where farmers produce more nutrition and earn better incomes if true cost accounting is done. And all the subsidies that go for the wrong thing don't hide the true economics.
Yeah, yeah. Let's. There is a there's a battle going on, and there has been one for a long time. Can we look at Farm to Fork initiative in the EU? And I think that is also a reaction to chemical agriculture, and it's an attempt to reduce the use of chemicals by 50% in the EU and to increase the certified organic land to 25%. That's a very bold thing for a government to choose to do. And they're trying to export that to the rest of the world. And what I see is that there's a battle for hearts and souls, and the other side, unfortunately, is led by the United States, by the USDA. And they have tremendous power, and they come in. They hate the Farm to Fork initiative. They want people to use chemicals, right?
Yeah.
So do you see that battle played out in India at all? Or is that?
Oh, yes, very, very much. We don't use farm to fork because we don't use forks. But definitely the creation, first of all, our land is full of local markets. When I go to remote villages in Bengal and Orissa, you go to a village, and if it's a weekly market day, women will be there sitting with 10 brinjals. Someone will be sitting with lady fingers. Another woman will be sitting with greens. Local produce sold locally, which also maximizes biodiversity because local people eat what is grown locally. And we have in Navdanya reinforced that idea of local economies, local living economies. We encourage farmers to first eat organic. When we certify the farmers, they keep diaries. And I always say, you first put down what your family needs. And the first share of organic will go to your children and your family. The second should be sold in the community and the village. And only a few rare items should go to distant markets. And for that, we will support you totally. But the rest, you should create. And it's quite amazing. Women up in the mountains have created barter systems. One grows onions, one grows tomatoes, they exchange. They've created local, they bring their vegetables into the local market and sell once a week. So people are creating these new initiatives. It is the same as farm to fork. And of course, all our farmers use only native seeds and do only organic farming. And the third pillar of all this is local economy. For the farm to fork actually took a lot of work because a big movement in Europe to save the bees and humans and farmers, save the bees and farmers, was launched. I think millions of people, and they'd asked me to be a patron of this when it was launched. It was before COVID, and millions of people signed, and that kept building up for getting rid of pesticides, and out of that came farm. So in Europe, there's not just a group of organic farmers, there's a very strong group of conscious consumers. And the two have joined hands in the farm to fork. For me, it's tragic that United States, which started as a farming country, both if you think of the history of the Native Americans, they were farmers, or you think of the settlers. America was a land of small farmers. And that's what made it a free land. And then the war, as I've written in many, including in the Green Revolution, but many of my books, Oneness versus 1%, Who Really Feeds the World, I have tracked that this whole fossil chemical, because all chemicals for agriculture are made from fossil fuels, whether it's fertilizer or pesticides, herbicides, and their origin is in Hitler's Germany. Now, I.G. Farben had the skills of chemistry. And the skills began by trying to displace India's natural indigo, yeah, to make artificial dyes. And that's where the chemistry really started. But during Hitler's time, Standard Oil, which was Rockefeller, joined hands with IG Farben. They had a company, and I have it in my book, Oneness versus 1%, which I've written with my son. IG Farben, Standard Oil. Standard Oil, Rockefeller provided the money and the fossil fuels. And IG Farben provided the chemistry. They made explosives using fossil fuels. And then those explosives became fertilizer factories. And they talked about growing food in the air, yeah, because they were fixing atmospheric nitrogen. The first chemicals to kill people in concentration camps were the origins of pesticides, Zyklon B. And that's how all of this trend starts. And the tragedy is that most people don't know US corporations were deeply involved. Monsanto had a company with Bayer called Mobay, and now Bayer's bought Monsanto. So in a way, they're back in the original. DuPont used to work with IG Farben. So all of the American companies who today are what I call the poison cartel have their common roots at the time of Hitler's Germany and the war. And in a way, I see the Green Revolution industrial farming as a war against the earth. And, when I wrote the book, The Violence of the Green Revolution, I didn't know what would be the right way. But I just called it non-violent farming, ahimsak kheti. Without violence. Why are we using these tools of war? Why are we using these tools of war? In the most beautiful activity, which is care for the earth. And I know you've been so deeply involved in the fake organic, yeah? Because for me, farming, agriculture means the care for the land. Organic farming means care for the soil and regeneration of the soil. The minute you banish soil, you've already lost agriculture and organic. And that's why I found torn pieces of Howard's book, The Agricultural Testament. And from there, we could rebuild what India used to be like. And, as you know, Howard's Agriculture Testament is called the Bible of modern organic farming. And I think it's so important for all your listeners to know that first, they tried to substitute the soil's regenerative fertility, which comes only through organic, with synthetic fertilizers, pretending that they can grow food in the air. Then, of course, they went for the seed. Seed renews itself, seed multiplies. They said, seed shouldn't renew. Seed should be intellectual property. And so they started to do genetic engineering in order to make seed non-renewable and to continue to sell pesticides. Roundup ready crops sell more Roundup. Bt toxin crops also sell more pesticides because they don't work. Now they're working on two elements that are being pushed by the US Department of Agriculture and, sadly, the envoy for climate change. Because right now, every wrong kind of agriculture and food activity is being offered as a solution to climate change. And the project is called AIM, the Agriculture Mission, Innovation Mission. Yeah, because there's this obsession that everything that is, nature that is, obsolete. The man who made the Impossible Burger, he says animals and plants are unimprovable technologies. They're constantly evolving technologies, unimprovable technology. And I have a technology that will constantly improve. It's failing. 14 patents, it's failing. I'm doing my next book on climate change and the fake food push. And while I'm writing the chapter, one by one, the companies are failing. So on the one hand, in agriculture, the whole issue of digital agriculture, drones, and I call it, if the first was the soil is empty, then the seed is empty, and now the head is empty, farmer's head is empty. He has to be fed with instructions on his smartphone, how to farm. And how do they get the farm instruction? By first going to the farmer's field. It's called Field View, the Monsanto Buyer Program. Field View, they go to the farmer's field, photograph his whole farm, then feed it back into his smartphone, make him pay for the data, and tell him now turn left and irrigate. Put this much fertilizer, this much. But it's a system that can only work with external inputs. Internal input, organic farming, is a self-organized autopoietic system. It cannot be managed externally. All you have to do is support the system to work well. And then, of course, the fake food issue. We've already got 75% sickness because of ultra-processed food, which means fake ingredients. But now they want to push it all the way and pretend that somehow this will solve the climate. No. My book, Soil Not Oil, tracked at that time that about 45 to 50% emissions come from industrial agriculture. And organic farming is a solution. Now, since I wrote that book in 2009, so much data on organic farming and how through the plants, the photosynthesis, and the soil sequestration, that is how you solve the climate problem and you solve the food problem and the nutrition problem. So when they talk about fake food, what they don't tell you, it will need 5 times more feed stock than the cows whom they want to finish off. It requires 25 times more energy and has 25 times more emissions because it's energy intensive. And that's why all this hydroponics, all of this vertical farming, what I learned when I did study the Green Revolution was the 2 bits that they always leave out, which are key to any system. The first is energy use. Do you put in more energy than you get out? Then it's a negative energy system. And second, do you put in more resources than you produce? Industrial agriculture used 10 units to produce 1 unit of food. By the time you get to industrial factory farming, it goes up to 100. By the time you get to industrial lab food production, it'll probably 1,000 or 2,000. So the energy calculus is always left out. And that's where the real answer is. Because when you work with the living soil and you work on small scale and you work with the biodiversity's own energy, that's how you actually generate negative energy. Schrodinger, because I did quantum theory, Schrodinger has a book, What is Life? And he says, life is not like machines. So we can't apply thermodynamics to it. Life cheats thermodynamics all the time. It's a negative entropy system. Machines create, labs will create entropy and waste. Plants don't create waste. They bind the energy to create negative energy. And that's how the earth has been sustained. That's how organic farming has renewed the earth's processes. And that's what we must continue, no matter what nonsense is pushed.
Okay. So we face a challenge, and the challenge is that the corporations have become very skilled at putting on sheep's clothing and joining a flock. And that's how the Real Organic Project got born, because we realized that we had to fight for the meaning of organic. And I see the same thing is happening with regenerative now. Regenerative agriculture, the most vocal champions now are Bayer Monsanto and Syngenta and Cargill and Pepsi and McDonald's. It's the same playbook, but they like it even better because there's no legal definition.
You're very right. You're very right, Dave. I've just done a foreword to a book on real regenerative. They're bringing out in Germany because Syngenta is really pushing. But if you go down the line, the first bit is a regenerative, the next bit is all chemicals. So tucked away in their definition of regenerative is the old chemical farming. And I think if there's one thing Orwell's 1984 taught us, is don't trust words. Because in an age of doublespeak, The words will mean the opposite of what they are. And that's why look at the practice. So organic actually means the science of life, science of living systems. That's the original definition. But because industrialism could not tolerate the idea that living systems had any science, the best of scientists were attacked. The best. Goethe was attacked. I don't think Harvard was so badly attacked because he stayed on in India for a long time. But in England, the group that formed the Soil Association, of course, they were badly attacked. And I think what we should always look for is, yes, there's appropriation of the word, but always look for the practice. Is the practice still chemical? And that's why the practice is organic, is what we have to promote. And second, you see, in the first round of organic, we worked in a privileged space. There were consumers who were willing to buy, and there were organic farmers who would produce. Now, the organic farmers have been bought out by the big giants, and the organic trade has been bought out. Whole Foods is now Amazon. So we've just done a manifesto of the movement I started called Diverse Women for Diversity, and we called it Making Peace with the Earth. And, 50 women from around the world drafted different sections. So you should look at the Navdani International website and find. But, there's this group of Latin Americans who said, market-free solutions, not free market. Mm. So what we have to move towards is the fact that there are three crises at the same time. Farmers are facing a huge crisis of survival, both organic and the ones who are conventional. No farmer is surviving. So we need an economy where they get their fair share. And that's the only way they'll get it is through direct relationships with those who eat. The second is those who eat are suffering huge epidemics of disease. And as is often said in the organic movement, pay for organic today and save your bills from the doctor tomorrow. Yeah? Because I have started saying organic is actually a provisioning of health. It's not a product. It's providing health. It's providing health to the soil, to the planet, and it's providing health to people. So we should start looking at it as a health system and therefore get the farmers to join, the eaters. The CSAs were like that, and we have to bring much of that. Farmers markets were like that. We have to bring all that back. And the third element, of course, is the fact more and more people are falling out into poverty. The hunger right now in the UK, in America, the cost of living crisis. I think we'll have to crack that because there is no way we can just let our brothers and sisters die of hunger, including in the rich countries.
You wrote a book many years ago called Monocultures of the Mind.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important term because what we're talking about in the end is not changing a rule or a regulation or a law. It has to be changing how we think.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that a little bit, Vandana?
Yeah. So, my early activism, of course, long before Green Revolution in Punjab, was working with the Chipko movement for forest protection. And, the women said, we're going to hug the trees. You kill us before you kill the trees. And what they were defending were the mixed forests. Now, what they call wildfires these days are actually manufactured fires for the simple reason you spray Roundup on a mixed forest and you kill every broadleaf species to harvest the conifers. You'll have desiccation. Roundup is a desiccant. You make a forest dried up and desertified. Of course it'll catch fire. Yeah? So it's the Roundup driving those fires. And in those days, the women used to constantly talk about how rich the natural forests were, how much they produced. They knew all the biodiversity. I always say my University of Biodiversity was the women who'd never been to school. And then came the Green Revolution. Here are people saying, we grow more. It's a monoculture. It's a sad, pathetic monoculture of dwarf plants of one species. When we grow 9 plants together, that's what Navdanya means. 12 plants together. mixtures everywhere. So I said, what is letting the people who say this is more productive and this is unproductive? In fact, there was an essay in which I cited a study in which they said, in a rainforest, most species are clearly weeds because they're not commercial. So the monoculture of the mind is the mind that looks at nature from the perspective of a market, of commodities. And there are only a few species of the forest that you will extract. The rest are called weeds. They're only, we used to eat 10,000 species of plants. But when industrial agriculture and commodification of food came in, we're eating 10. The soups are made of the same soya, the bread is made of the same soya, the milk is made of the same soya. But of course, for our gut microbiome, this feels like an assault. Same for wheat, uniformity of wheat. So I realize what's blocking people from seeing the reality that is of diversity producing more, diversity being rich in the forest, in the ocean, in the farm, is this blind, a blinker of the monoculture of the mind. You put on blinkers, you won't be able to see the diversity. And that's how the term monoculture of the mind came. It's the problem of the mind.
Okay. And that mindset has produced corporate agriculture.
Yes, absolutely. See, the mindset has 3 M's in it. The first is, of course, it comes from militarism. The products came from militarism, but the mindset is, every insect's an enemy, just wipe them out. Every plant is a weed, just glyphosate them to death, round them up. Every fungus is an enemy. And so they create pathogenic fungus. And then they have to, the whole neonicotide debate is because they coat the seed with neonicotinoids, only because you've killed the beneficial fungi in the soil. And all of this treadmill of chemicals is a result of the military operation in the mind. But the second is, scientifically, it's rooted in the mechanical mind of thinking of the world as a machine that you run and you fix and you operate, not as a self-organized system. That guy is a self-organized living organism. Every seed and every plant is a self-organized system. Every microbe is a self-organized system. Now, that's the true science of life. And that's what organic is. And then third, of course, is the blindness of monocultures. So militarism, mechanistic thought, and the monoculture of the mind. We need to move from that to peace, making peace with the earth, definitely moving out of the mechanistic mind to the ecology of the mind, because we have that capacity as human beings to think differently, to think in relationship with the living world. And finally, instead of monocultures of the mind, the biodiversity of the mind. Yeah. So we call it living knowledges, yeah, and knowledges of peace. And it's very exciting, the work we do on the ground. The women farmers understand all this like this. And what they give back then is such wisdom, because they're practicing with the earth. And in fact, my next book, which will come out by Synergetic Press, is on the living earth. And at the end, they wanted a last chapter on all the positive things that are happening. And of course, all that is happening with real people on the ground. And I think we have to shift the organic movement into a movement of the people.
Yeah.
Because earlier, when the standards were secure and the markets were honest, we could depend on all of that. But now everything's being corrupted, but food is still needed. And we still need farmers. And definitely one of the slogans I criticize very strongly is from Bill Gates, his paid journalists, which is basically farming without farmers, which is this whole digital agriculture, farming without farmers, food without farms. That's where they want to go. Green Revolution was the first step. But now they want to go farming without farmers, food without farm. And the only way we'll be able to work into the future with a different worldview is farming by loving farmers who care for the earth, and food from farms that produce good food. And that will be the revolution of our times.
Yes. I talked to a woman who is working as an organic advocate in Tanzania, and she said in her country, there's not a single desk in the whole government to support organic agriculture, but there are many desks to support chemical agriculture.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's now in India, there's more of an actual battle because there are over 1 million organic farmers in India, I have read. Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
So you've got a big movement going against that corporate agriculture, that commodified, centralized agriculture.
And the reason for the growth of organic is, first, if farmers get onto that treadmill, they get into debt. In the extreme cases, they commit suicide, like in the case of the BT cotton, or they lose their land. And so organic is a defense, against a farming that traps farmer in debt. The second thing that's happening is, because of the Green Revolution, there's water scarcity everywhere. Now, organic, as you know, replenishes the soil moisture and allows farmers to farm both with increasing climate problems, but actually to turn the soil into a water reservoir. And so all of these externalities of industrial agriculture is creating a new opportunity for farmers to wake up. And wherever there's a little facilitation, like in the regions where we work, little facilitation, the farmers run on their own. In many regions where we work, the local administration is coming to the farmers and say, teach us. Tell us how to shift to organic so we can shift our local policies.
Yeah, that's great. So my last question, Vandana, it's a big question, which is, what can we do? Some people get this. They hear your words. They understand that there's a choice that we face, but they see this enormous power that is very hard to stand up to. So what's your advice for what a person can do? What should they do?
Well, if you're a farmer, keep farming. Don't give up. And if you were growing a commodity that got you into a price crash and debt for inputs, shift to organic. And there will be people in your neighborhood who need food, and just find ways to link to them. If you want to be a farmer, find ways to get access to land, either to lease it or a group. I've had so many people saying, oh, my father left me land. What do I do? I said, get 100 young people who want to farm and have them work the farm as a collective. People are dying. I've in universities in Berlin, in universities in, I was debating Bayer. And Bayer said the reason we need these new technologies is no one wants to farm. So we were in a debate, and I turned to the audience. I said, if you could farm, how many of you would farm? Whole hands went up. So we have to create new possibilities for farming. And it won't be easy, but we have to find ways. For eaters, really, just recognize that eating that crap is very cruel to your body. Yeah? Organic is a necessity. It's not a luxury. We've been made to feel it's a luxury. And when you feel overwhelmed by the power of the 4 to 5 poison cartel, just turn to the earth and turn within you and think of the power of the earth. You put one seed and it grows you your crop. Think of your power. Your power as a thinking, conscious being. Yeah, we have a beautiful word for this. The power within, the power to act. It's called Shakti. So, every time you get overwhelmed by the poison cartel and their power. Turn the other way, turn to the earth, turn to yourself, turn to your community. So we have the real power. We have the real power to do what is right. And in the process, we make them irrelevant.
Yeah. Thank you. Vandana Shiva, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Great
I'm glad all this worked out.
Finally.
Finally, we've made many attempts. This one worked out.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel, and you can join us every Tuesday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.